The first thing you remember isn't the rain. It's the silence that happens inside you when someone you love chooses not to love you back. That silence. It hits harder than any storm. You were only 15, but pain never waits for adulthood. It finds you early. It finds you quietly. And that night, it found you standing in a house that never truly felt like home. The sky was heavy, swollen with clouds, as if even nature knew something inside you was about to break. But the real storm wasn't outside. It was in the way people who should have protected you didn't. You were holding a tray of tea when your mother said it, so casually, it almost didn't make sense at first. You'll sleep outside tonight. There's no space.
No hesitation. No softness.
No glance to check how much those words would cut. And you waited. God, you waited. For her to correct herself. For your father to step in. For someone to act like you mattered. But no one did. Your cousins laughed in the background. Your father kept talking loudly, trying to look generous and kind. The only thing louder than his voice was the truth that you were invisible in your own family. When your mother repeated the command, something inside you cracked. Not with noise, but with understanding. You weren't being asked. You were being dismissed, pushed aside so that others could feel comfortable in the space that should have been yours. You stepped outside with a blanket that felt lighter than the weight on your chest. And the rain, it didn't wait. The first drop hit you like a warning. The next like a sentence being passed. And then the entire sky opened, as if it had been holding back just long enough for you to walk out the door. You stood there, soaked in seconds, clothes clinging, hands trembling, breath fogging the cold air like you were someone fading. Through the window, you saw warmth you were never allowed to touch. Your cousins spread across soft bedding. Your parents smiling. Lights glowing in a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to everyone except you. No one looked for you. No one checked. No one wondered. And it wasn't the cold that stung. It was the realization that you could disappear, and it would change nothing inside those walls. You found the shed because it was the only place left. A broken roof, damp air, a wooden bench that barely held your weight. You curled into yourself, shaking so hard your bones felt like they were speaking the pain you couldn't. That night carved something into you, a truth, a wound, promise, because as you sat there, forgotten, drenched, unseen, another storm began. But this one was inside you, slow, quiet, powerful, the kind that turns a boy into someone who refuses to stay unwanted. You didn't know it then, but that night wasn't your ending. It was your beginning, the moment the world pushed you out, so you could learn to build a place no one would ever push you from again. Growing up surrounded by people makes you think loneliness is impossible. But you learn quickly that loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being unseen. And in my house, being unseen wasn't a moment. It was a routine. There were always people everywhere. Slippers scattered like footprints of guests who felt more at home than I ever did. Doors opening and closing before I could even take a breath. Voices layered on top of each other until the house felt like a marketplace. To everyone else, it was lively. To me, it was noise I never truly belonged to. In the middle of all that chaos, I became something quiet. Something that blended into the background because blending was easier than hoping. My parents never said it directly, but their actions shaped the role I played. Help, adjust, step aside, disappear a little so someone else can fit better. And every time relatives walked through the door, I already knew what was coming. Move your things. Give them your bed. You're older. You should adjust. The script was so predictable that sometimes I said the lines in my head before they were even spoken. Like my life had been rehearsed, but no part of it belonged to me. I never envied my cousins. They didn't know any better. They were celebrated, pampered, held in the center. I wasn't jealous, I was confused. Confused why my comfort was optional. Why my pain was invisible. Why my presence was the only one that came with sacrifice. There was one evening, small but unforgettable. The house was crowded again, laughter bouncing off walls I wished would defend me. I was carrying extra plates when my youngest cousin nudged me and said, half laughing, half curious, "Why do you always adjust? Are you the helper of the house?" He didn't mean to hurt me, but sometimes the deepest truths come through careless jokes. And the worst part? My parents laughed too, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't understand the weight of what they were laughing at. I forced a smile because that's what I had learned to do. Carry the pain quietly so others could stay comfortable. But something inside me folded in on itself. A small collapse that no one heard except me. Night after night, I slept wherever I could fit. On the cold floor, in corners of the living room, near the back door where the wind slipped in easily. Sometimes on the rooftop, under a sky that felt more protective than the walls around me. And while my cousins rested in my bed, I would stare into the dark and ask the same silent question. Why am I always the one who doesn't belong? The answer never came. Not then. But the realization did. Slowly, painfully, honestly. My parents didn't hate me. They just didn't see me. Not the way a child needs to be seen. Not the way a child deserves to be seen. And that truth settled into me like cold air you can't escape. I was born in that house, but I wasn't built for it. Or maybe it wasn't built for me. Those small, unnoticed heartbreaks shaped me more than any big tragedy ever could. They were turning me into someone different. Someone I didn't understand yet. Someone stronger than the boy who kept stepping aside. But back then, I was just a child moving through a crowded house, with a heart that felt completely, achingly empty. Some pains don't arrive suddenly. They grow in the background, wrapping around you like vines, tightening a little more each day until one moment. A moment you never see coming. You realize you can't breathe anymore. For me, that moment came on a night that looked like every other night in that house. My cousins were over again. My mother had turned into the perfect host, moving around the kitchen like she was feeding royalty. My father was performing the role he loved the most. The charming storyteller, the generous uncle, the man everyone admired except the one person who desperately needed his attention. And me? I was moving through the house like a shadow, carrying plates, clearing floors, doing the tasks no one noticed until they weren't done. Pretending the smile on my face was real. Pretending the weight in my chest wasn't getting heavier. But something changed that night. It happened in a moment so simple that if you saw it from outside, you might think it was nothing. I was walking past the bedroom door when I heard loud laughter. Not unusual. Not surprising. My cousins always laughed freely. They had never learned to hold pain the way I did. But then I heard it. The sentence that felt like someone reached inside my ribs and pulled. He sleeps outside every time we come. I think he's used to it now. They laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd said all evening. Another voice chimed in. Maybe he likes the cold. Some people enjoy suffering. More laughter. Louder. Crueler. I should have walked away, but something kept me frozen. And then I heard the part that hurt more than their words. My parents were in the room, sitting with them, listening, and agreeing with their silence. They didn't say I sacrificed for them. They didn't say I gave up my room. They didn't say I didn't deserve the cold. They said nothing at all. And their nothing was louder than the laughter. In that hallway, my hands began to tremble. Not from fear. Not from weather. From understanding. From the realization that I wasn't simply ignored. I was disrespected. Unvalued. Treated like a convenience in a house that should have been home. I wasn't part of the family picture. I was the background. Replaceable. Forgettable. Their laughter echoed down the hallway like metal scraping against metal. Every memory I had, every night outside, every meal I skipped, every sacrifice I made, rushed through me with painful clarity. None of it was unseen. None of it was misunderstood. It was expected. It was normal. To them, my suffering was habit. And something inside me cracked. Not a loud break. Not a dramatic collapse. Just a small, final shift like a door closing for good. A door inside my heart that would never reopen. I walked outside, needing space, needing air. The sky was clear that night, but I still felt drenched on the inside. The loneliness, the cold, the smallness. They were all still there, clinging to me like the memory of every moment I wasn't chosen. And for the first time, I whispered to myself, I don't belong here. Not in that room. Not in that house. Not in that version of life where my worth was measured by how well I stayed invisible. That moment was my breaking point, the quiet collapse before the rise, the pain that would one day turn into purpose. And I didn't know it then, but my breaking point wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the man I was meant to become. Leaving a home is painful, but leaving a family while they're still breathing next to you, that's a different kind of wound. It doesn't bleed on the outside. It bleeds inside your chest, quietly, where no one ever looks. And the night I realized I had to leave, that wound opened in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. It started the same way so many nights had started before. Relatives at the dinner table, laughter echoing through every room, my parents performing their familiar roles as the perfect hosts. I was sweeping the living room, moving around like a shadow, when my father spoke without glancing in my direction. Beta, tonight you sleep in the storeroom. The cousins need space. The storeroom, the place where broken things were kept. Things no one used. Things no one cared about. I didn't react. Not because I had grown stronger, but because I had grown numb. And that numbness scared me more than all the past hurt combined. When pain stops hurting, that's when you realize something inside you has gone quiet in a dangerous way. I stood there, broom in hand, watching them laugh. My father telling stories, my mother moving plates, my cousins enjoying the comfort I was always asked to surrender. My mother brushed past me and tapped my shoulder gently, the way you tap old furniture to see if it still holds. And then the words came, the ones that didn't break me, but revealed the break that had already happened. My aunt said, "Poor boy, he's always the one adjusting." And my mother replied almost proudly, "He's used to it. He doesn't mind. He doesn't mind." They didn't just believe that lie. They built their entire comfort on it. On me. On my silence. I walked to the storeroom slowly, as if every step was confirming the truth I didn't want to face. When I opened the door, dust rose like it was greeting me. Boxes stacked high, spider webs in the corners. The sharp smell of things forgotten by everyone except me. I laid a thin mat on the floor, a mat that barely softened anything, and I sat down. And in that suffocating little room, for the first time in weeks, my tears finally came. Not violently, not loudly, just silent tears that slipped out because my heart had whispered something I couldn't ignore anymore. I can't do this. My hands shook. My breath felt fractured. But my mind, for the first time, was clear. If I stay here, I will disappear. And the truth is, I already had. Piece by piece, night by night, sacrifice by sacrifice. If I stayed, I would become a man who believed he deserved nothing. A man who took the floor because he thought the bed wasn't for him. A man who confused adjustment with worth. I didn't want that life, so I whispered the words I had swallowed for years. I have to leave. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Out of survival. That night, I made the quiet decision that would change everything. I didn't know where I'd go. I didn't know what waited outside those walls. But I knew one thing. Staying would break me. Leaving might save me. And in that dusty room, with tears drying on my cheeks and my heart trembling between hope and fear, I said the promise out loud. One day, the boy they pushed aside will build something they'll depend on. I had no idea then how true that promise would become. I didn't walk into that night expecting to fall apart. I wasn't planning on losing control or letting the weight finally crush me. But breakdowns don't come with warnings. They don't knock. They don't ask for permission. They just arrive. The moment you've pretended to be strong for too long. That day had drained every part of me. 14 hours of labor that felt like punishment. My hands were torn open, raw from the weight I carried. My clothes clung to me with sweat and dust. My legs felt like they were made of stone. My boss had shouted at me twice for things I didn't even do, and all I could do was nod like it was my fault. My coworkers glanced at me with those soft, pitying eyes. The kind that tell you they don't believe you'll survive the week. But the work wasn't what cracked me. It was the silence. The silence that comes after everyone else goes home. After the noise stops. After the world quiets down just enough for your thoughts to get loud. The silence that presses on your chest until your heartbeat feels like a burden. The silence that forces you to hear every memory you've been trying to outrun. I walked back to my tiny rented room. Not a home. Just four walls and a bed that groaned with every movement. I didn't switch on the light. I didn't take off my shoes. I just sat on the floor, my back against the wall, my head hanging low as if the exhaustion had finally won. And that's when everything hit at once. The laughter from the house I left behind. The insults I pretended didn't cut. The hunger I ignored to save money. The pain of working like a man while still feeling like an unwanted boy. My breath turned shallow. My chest tightened. I tried to swallow the tears, the way I had taught myself to do for years. But they came anyway. Soft at first, then harder, until it felt like I was drowning in everything I had survived. I had always thought strength meant holding everything in, keeping my face straight, enduring quietly. But that night, for the first time, I understood the truth. Strength isn't pretending. Strength is facing what hurts. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel powerful. I felt broken, completely broken, like the dreams I carried had slipped out of my hands and shattered on the floor beside me. But in the middle of that collapse, something else stirred. Small, faint, but real. The thought, if I give up now, their laughter wins. Not just my cousin's mockery, not just my parents' silence, but every voice that ever told me I wasn't enough. I wiped my face with shaking hands. I lifted my head. The room was dark, but I looked up anyway. At the cracked ceiling like it was a sky I wasn't done reaching for. I wasn't healed. I wasn't confident. I wasn't suddenly fearless. But I was awake, and waking up hurts more than falling apart. That night didn't destroy me. It destroyed the version of me that stayed quiet. The version that believed pain meant weakness. I broke down, so the real me could finally stand up. And from that night onward, I knew with absolute certainty, I was never going back. Change doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't knock on your door or announce itself like some dramatic turning point in a movie. It comes quietly, softly, almost too small to notice. For me, it happened the next morning. I woke up on that same thin mattress, eyes swollen, throat dry, head pounding from the breakdown I had tried to swallow the night before. But inside me, something felt different. Not strong, not confident, not brave, just awake, like a dying fire that suddenly remembered how to breathe. I walked to the mirror, if you could call that small piece of cracked glass a mirror. My reflection looked like a man the world had already given up on. Hair sticking out in every direction, skin tired and dull, shoulders bent as if they were carrying years instead of days. I didn't look like someone who could change his life, but for the first time, I felt like someone who might. I stared at myself and whispered a sentence that tasted like a promise. If no one believes in me, I will be the first. That day at work, I didn't drag my feet. I didn't complain. I didn't let yesterday's pain turn into today's excuse. Instead, I watched. I watched how the machines worked, how the experienced workers moved with rhythm and precision, how efficiency wasn't just about strength, it was about understanding. And then something hit me. I wasn't failing because I was incapable. I was failing because I was untrained. And untrained can be fixed. So during breaks, instead of sitting alone pretending I didn't care, I asked questions. I asked the older workers how they did things. I asked them why they did it that way. I asked the things I used to be too proud or too scared to ask. People noticed. A senior worker, a man in his 50s with hands that looked like they had survived 10 different lifetimes, sat beside me and said, "You work harder than boys half your age. Don't waste that." His words weren't a compliment. They were a spark. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not judged, not mocked, not measured against someone else, just seen as a man trying. That night, when everyone else slept, I made a plan. A real plan, not a dream, not a fantasy, not some vague hope I whispered to myself on lonely nights. I wrote down 3 sentences on a blank page. Learn a skill. Save every rupee I can. Build something that is mine. That was it. Simple. Small. almost insignificant. But it was the first time in my life that I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning, and just like that, the first spark of change lit the darkness I had been living in for too long. Years passed, slowly, painfully, relentlessly, and little by little, the life I had once only dreamed of began to take shape. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. Most days, I was exhausted, hands cracked, back aching, heart weary from carrying the weight of everything I had endured. But I was building, piece by piece, moment by moment, the first real victory. I remember the night I earned enough to pay my rent without borrowing. The joy didn't explode. There was no cheering, no one waiting to celebrate. It was quiet, almost secretive, like a small flame flickering in a dark room, mine alone. I bought a notebook that night, one that would be filled with plans, strategies, and steps toward independence. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something I had to wait for. It felt like something I could touch, something I could shape with my own hands. Learning, failing, rising. The work was brutal. Long hours that felt endless. Mistakes, failures, rejections, they became constant companions. Some nights I went to bed hungry. Some nights I cried silently on the cold floor of my rented room, hands pressed against the walls like I could hold myself together. But each morning I got up, and each time I was stronger, not just in body, but in the quiet spaces inside me that life had once tried to destroy. I learned patience. I learned focus. I learned that every no I faced wasn't punishment. It was training. And slowly, the small victories began to add up. I started a small business, fixing and cleaning things for clients. And for the first time, people depended on me. Not because of my age, not because of my background, but because I showed up, because I delivered, because I was consistent, being needed, being valued. That feeling hit harder than anything I had ever known. The shelter I became. I thought back to that night in the rain, the cold, the betrayal, the silence, the way I had been invisible. And I realized something powerful. I was becoming the shelter I had always needed, not just for myself, but for others. A man who could stand alone, yet provide strength for those who came seeking it. A man who had survived storms and could now offer refuge from them. I wasn't bitter anymore, not fully, but I was focused, determined, unstoppable in my quiet way. The boy who once shivered in the rain was gone. In his place stood a man built from resilience, pain, and unwavering determination. Reflection. Some nights, I walked the empty streets and thought of home. The laughter I had never been part of. The warmth I had been denied. And I smiled quietly, because deep down I knew the life I was building wasn't just for me. It was a statement, promise, proof that someone who was once overlooked could become someone indispensable. And that was only the beginning. Life has a strange way of balancing itself. Years pass. You grow. You endure. You become someone you didn't know existed inside yourself. And just when the memory of old pain starts to fade, the past shows up at your door. Unexpected visitors. It was a quiet evening. My office was exactly how I liked it. Papers neatly stacked, the soft hum of the computer, the faint scent of coffee hanging in the air. This was the life I had built. Not for recognition, not for applause, just for the quiet, undeniable proof that I could stand on my own. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wasn't in the habit of opening the door without knowing who it was. When I did, there they were. My parents, my cousins, older, slightly grayer, worn in ways that only time can reveal. And yet, despite the familiarity, there was hesitation in their posture. Uncertainty, the awkwardness of strangers walking into a house whose rules they had never fully understood. The shift. The same people who had sent me out into the rain now stood before me, seeking something, shelter perhaps, guidance, a lifeline. I noticed it immediately. Their words were careful, measured, gestures cautious, their usual laughter, their dismissive comments, their air of casual superiority, all gone. The roles had reversed. Inner reflection. For a long moment, I just looked at them, quietly, observing, taking it all in. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the urge to punish. I felt calm. I felt grounded. I felt powerful in a way only time, struggle, and relentless endurance can build. I realized then, they had never given me shelter when I needed it. So I had built one for myself. And now they were the ones seeking it. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pride. It was life's quiet justice, the universe showing the value of endurance, patience, and self-respect. The moment of truth. They asked for help. Nervously, tentatively, almost shyly. I could have said no. I could have let years of hurt dictate my response. But I didn't. I offered guidance, support, boundaries, not because I was weak, not because I felt guilt, but because I was strong in a way they had never taught me to be. And while they were learning humility, I felt a satisfaction no praise, no money, no recognition could ever give. Closing reflection. That day I understood fully the stormy nights, the betrayals, the nights I had shivered alone in the rain. All of it had been necessary, because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had become someone who could withstand storms and provide shelter to those who had once left me out in the cold. And for the first time I saw it clearly. Life had returned what I had earned. Not wealth, not power over them, but respect, value, the undeniable power to shape my own destiny. I had spent years building my life, years learning, struggling, rising from nothing. And now they were standing at my doorstep, hesitant, uncertain, needing me. Could have been the perfect moment for anger. A list of grievances long enough to drown anyone. But that wasn't the man I had become. The calm before the words. I invited them in. We sat in the living room. The air was thick, heavy with unspoken memories. I watched their faces. The same faces that had ignored me, dismissed me, left me shivering outside in the rain. I could see the hesitation, the guilt barely hidden behind polite smiles. They had no idea who they were dealing with now, and I didn't plan to tell them outright. I let silence stretch. The quiet was heavier than any argument, louder than any accusation. They shifted uncomfortably. I didn't, speaking the truth. Finally, I spoke, not with anger, not with bitterness, with calm, deliberate honesty. You once sent me out into the rain. You made me invisible in my own home. You believed my absence wouldn't matter. I forgave that long ago, but I have never forgotten it. Their eyes widened. Not fear, not exactly, but a slow, dawning realization. This was the boy they had overlooked, grown into a man unbroken by absence, unshaken by presence. I continued, steady and deliberate. I helped you because I can. I guided you because I choose to. But I will not let the past define my peace anymore. I am not the child you ignored. I am the man I built myself to be. The shift in power. In that moment, the room shifted. They had expected submission, apology, gratitude. Instead, they met calm strength, a boundary they had never imagined. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of my journey. The years of pain, sacrifice, and struggle had become something unshakable, something they could not control, something they could no longer diminish. Inner reflection. I realized then that confrontation is not always about anger. Sometimes it's about presence, about showing who you have become, about declaring, without words of vengeance, that you are no longer defined by those who once left you out in the storm. I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I didn't need their validation. I only needed my truth. And in that truth, I finally felt free. Closing thought. That night, I went to bed thinking not of them, but of myself. The boy who once shivered outside. The man who now stood firm inside. And I whispered quietly, a vow to the man I had become. I didn't rise to punish you. I rose to honor myself. The journey had been long. Years of cold nights, quiet pain, and relentless struggle had carved me into someone I barely recognized when I first looked in the mirror. Not the boy sent out into the rain. Not the invisible child who faded into the background of his own home, but a man, strong, self-reliant, unshakable, a life of my own. I stood in my apartment, looking out at the city lights shimmering in the distance. It was peaceful here, warm.
Mine.
I thought of the nights I had spent on cold floors, the meals I had given up, the tears I had let fall in silence. And I realized something profound. I had not just survived. I had thrived. I had built a life no one could take from me. And I had done it alone. The return of the past. Years ago, my parents and cousins had come back into my life. Needing guidance, needing shelter, needing me. I had given it. Not out of weakness. Not out of obligation. But out of strength. I did not resent them. I did not crave their approval. Their need no longer controlled me. I had learned the ultimate truth. The measure of a person is not how they are treated by others. It is how they respond when left to stand alone. Inner reflection. I thought of the boy I once was, standing soaked in the rain, shivering, abandoned, invisible. I thought of every betrayal, every sleepless night, every moment I had felt powerless. And I smiled, because those moments had built me. They had shaped the foundation of the man I had become. Someone resilient, confident, unwavering. Someone who could offer shelter to others, yet never lose himself. I had learned to protect my heart, to honor my worth, to rise without asking permission. A peaceful ending. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the rain pattering gently against the glass. The city shimmered below me, alive, indifferent, and full of possibility. And I knew finally I was free. Free from the past. Free from the pain. Free to live fully in the life I had built. The boy who was sent out into the rain no longer existed. The man who became the shelter he had once needed stood here now. Strong. Unbroken. Reborn. Final thought. Some storms don't break you. They build you. And some goodbyes are the greatest blessings of all.